If certain archaeological discoveries allow us to understand our forgotten past, others totally question the writing integral of our great history book. South America is a real hotbed of archaeological discoveries in all genres, generally more questions than answers, and Peru is certainly one of the high places of this mysterious human history. One of his many discoveries concern the now famous Piedra Dica, appeared at the end of the 60s in the region of Ica in Peru. These artifacts are stones in serious hits, as officially listed at over 15,000 pieces. These achievements have the particularity of representing scenes uncommon for so-called archaeological objects. In fact, the representations engraved on the stones say that many species of dinosaurs interacting with humans, but also advanced surgeries such as heart operations or advanced technologies, the main concern with these artifacts, and that the cohabitation between the represented species does not match the official timeline of history. The dinosaurs were extinct 65 million years ago, and the oldest known traces of hominids date back to only 2 or 3 million years for the oldest there, so at the very least 60 million years between the two. Starting from this observation, if these stones are authentic, it would mean that either history as trunk and dinosaurs would have survived until very recently, either humans are a lot but then much older than what we think, either a pocket of resistance of dinosaurs would have survived for more than 60 million years in a place geographically located and could have ended up rubbing shoulders with. So officially the worst 10K are a hoax, so the case is closed and there is no point in talking about it, since when a man says he is the author of a realization that goes for an absolute truth, indisputable and timeless. On the other hand, when another man claims to have seen an improbable event, his word is but worthless rantings and the about a simple-minded person to believe that the value given to word of a man depends more on the concordance with the dogmas in force rather than the real veracity of his words. But since the worst says that a seems very interesting, let's take a look at this dossier. Therefore the story begins in 1966 in Peru when the Dr. Cabrera acquires an engraved stone supposedly found in the region. The doctor recognizes on this engraving a species of fish extinct for millions of years. Having awakened its scientific curiosity, he will therefore decide to acquire other similar stones from the same site and bought 1340 in one piece from two men. Having discovered these two areas, the brothers' balances were already there, recovered several thousand engraved stones that he had offered to archaeologists without their paying attention. At the end of the 70s, the collection of Mr. Cabrera will reach more than 11,000 pieces, also from a local farmer. Everything will be exhibited in his private museum in Ica. The dimensions of these engraved stones range from a small pebble of a few hundreds of grams to rocks of several tens of kilos, but the representations engraved on these artifacts eventually raised questions as to the real origins of these stones and their impact on the history of humanity. The scenes showing dinosaurs of several species perfectly recognizable. Very detailed surgical procedures including cardiac or technologies do not correspond at all to the chronological stages of the development of history as we understand it today. Thanks to a growing media craze around her stones, says that, and to which she would change our history. The small group of people reselling these archaeological remains to Voice in 1975 be the creators of this hoax and have engraved the stones themselves in the zips using a dentist's burr by drawing on images from comics and magazines before sell to Mr. Cabrera. However, one of them will go back on his word some time later in an interview with a journalist German, proclaiming that if he had confessed to being the authors of the engravings displeased 10 cases, it was in order to avoid a conviction as a prison sentence from the Peruvian government for illegal sale of remains archaeological. Therefore we can legitimately ask the question, which of these two versions should we believe, the hoax or the lie? Let's take the hoax hypothesis. If in 1970 Mr. Cabrera had in his possession 11,000 pieces acquired since 1966, and assuming that a team of 4 carried out this fraud including the two brothers Soil, says the farmer of the second site, and possibly another accomplice, we would therefore have a production of 11,000 pieces in 5 years by 4 people, i.e. 550 stones engraved by year and per person, and therefore a stone and a half achieved per day and by fraudsters every day of the year for 5 years. Mathematically and humanly speaking, this is perfectly possible. The production a stone or two daily while engraving on pebbles in hits of the images using dentist burrs therefore seem perfectly achievable. Well, that this hypothesis requires a regularity and an incident of the Mons extreme to achieve the desired result, so it seems quite possible. But let's take a look at the 10K stones to see if the representation could attest to such a method of manufacturing. If they stop a highly subjective area, it is a fact that no one may deny or question, as that each cultural era corresponds to a style of representation. The paintings of the Middle Ages do not resemble not to more modern works like the Egyptian quantum style is clearly different from May in the Americas, for example, and no matter what, who will be able to recognize an artistic style corresponding to an era specifies that. We can also note that the more we advance in time and the more the representations are faithful to the model, whether in the proportion proportions, the layout, the colors or the volumes concerning the worst 10K and their representations. The present style does not particularly denote that of the pre-Columbian with lots of curves and area fills based on a repetition of geometric shapes line and grid. However, this precise type filling can also be explained by the support of the work, in this case a stone, and it is easier to multiply lines to using a dentist's burr to give a precise aspect to a material. Concerning representations of itself human dinosaurs axe medical and other technologies, we can note several things. Firstly, that if all the stone's 10 cases were carried out in the 60s, all the knowledge including testify his representations were already known. The different species of dinosaurs Stegosaurus, Triceratops, Diplodocus, Iguanodon or Tyrannosaurus were already part of the species identified by archaeologists, and it is therefore not a discovery of species unknown to this. The same goes for the surgical procedures of the devices technology, and even the Nazca geoglyphs present on some of these stones all of the elements represented on the stones say that they were all already present in popular culture at that time, and there is therefore no innovative contribution. One last thing can however be to credit fraud and hoax the simplistic or even childish style of the engravings if the details of the creatures and other patterns are undeniable. Note when even a rather coarse outline of the engravings, more like a drawing of a child or of someone not inclined to visual arts rather than an intention to want to convey a faithful, precise or even professional image something. However, it is true that engraving directly on pebbles or stones in more or less spherical sites should not facilitate the fidelity of the representation and the delicacy of the tracé. The number of stones achieved just like the artistic style where the representations do not allow, therefore not to exclude the hypothesis of a hoax or fraud. However, there remains one last element to take into account: 6 attempts to embezzlement. The goal is clearly the enrichment by the resale of these fake artifacts. Modern Quiros geese resell at a high price. Their discoveries plundered the history of mankind with amounts amounting to sometimes several $100,000 for some discoveries. But concerning our small group of supposed engraver in hits with dentist burrs or as again particular were identified, if a significant amount of stone was well and truly sold to Mr. Kadri, it was for a very modest sum, absolutely no justifying the time and energy to go to the realization supposed of these stones. It therefore seems unlikely that several people and during several years carried out more than 11,000 engraved stone not to draw almost no profit while reselling to a passionate man, and little price of stones recovered by ploughing his song seems much more plausible. Let us now look at the hypothesis of the lie, consisting therefore to deny the authenticity of the 10K stones and to claim to be the creators of them so as not to end up in prison for trafficking archaeological remains unless nourished by an insatiable quest for truth and a taste pronounced for lies and
disinformation. It seems totally logical that faced with a threat of imprisonment a person can lie is officially declared the opposite of this that she knows however to be true. If this hypothesis is correct, then no one can blame the whack and Rose Stone said that for lying about the origin of these artifacts, the problem being that still in this hypothesis of the lie it resulted in total confusion, even a global and scientific disinterest in what could be a source questioning about our past history. Because if these graffiti artists are authentic and if it does go back to a pre-Columbian women, that would mean that we ignore an entire part of our past as certain civilizations of certain species and certain facts which would totally change our knowledge and our vision of the world and its development. It is extremely easy to shout hoax when one cannot prove the veracity of a fact or when this fact notes with our ideological dogmas so as not to call into question our vision of the world and to remain convinced that we have at least the power to know, just as it is obviously extremely simple to falsify and create facts in order to deceive certain people or even enrich themselves fraudulently on the naivete of the people, but that the stone dick to be authentic work attesting to a world that is still us unknown, or men and dinosaurs cohabit together, or it is only a vulgar hoax orchestrated in order to carry out a meager profit that will at least have the merit of us pushing us to question ourselves, to research and especially to consider can be our history to pass otherwise, and sometimes to question certain beliefs that we are too often used to taking for truths. Music.